Police in Ottawa faced another large protest this weekend, the first since a convoy of trucks blocked up parts of this city for weeks in January and February. This time, things went much differently. Ottawa police established a vehicle exclusion zone. They had reinforcements from the RCMP and OPP as hundreds of motorcycles drove through the downtown. They did make 10 arrests over the first 2 days of the rally. There are still some events happening this morning, but organizers say they do plan to leave today. At the same time, the handling of the earlier so-called Freedom Convoy protest faces new scrutiny. This week, the government called an inquiry, as required by the law, into its use of the Emergencies Act to end that blockade. I spoke with the Minister of Public Safety, Mendicino, about that this morning. Minister Mendicino, nice to see you this morning.
Nice to see you.
There was obviously a lot of concern here in Ottawa ahead of this weekend's protest. I think 10 people have been arrested. There have been lots of tickets issued, but certainly not the same situation as we saw back in February. How do you make of how things were handled this time around?
Well, I think the police have had a much better handle on it. And as you pointed out, there's been some enforcement action taken, and we still have the rest of today to go. But I think by and large, people have been able to come express a point of view, and hopefully we'll be able to maintain some semblance of normalcy coming out of this weekend. There are still a lot of lessons to be taken from last January and February, which I know you're going to come to, but I'm encouraged by what I've seen from law enforcement. I think they were much better prepared this time around.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you would agree that it does demonstrate that if law enforcement is prepared, you don't actually need the Emergencies Act. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I think there are some very big distinctions between what we've seen this weekend and last January and February. I mean, first and foremost, in Ottawa, I think the size of the volume of the crowds were considerably smaller. Second, we did not have at the same time this weekend as in last January and February the simultaneous significant disruptions at numerous borders and ports of entry in British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, and in Ontario. You did not have this time around the city of Ottawa and the province of Ontario declaring states of emergency. And when you combine coming out of that, I think a much better preparatory plan on the part of Ottawa Police Service with additional reinforcements from the RCMP and the OPP, we were better prepared for it. But make no mistake about it, last January and February, we invoked the Emergencies Act because we had to. It was the responsible and the right thing to do.
So I want to talk a little bit about that, because that's how you did spend much of your week last week, and there will be ongoing questions, I think, for you and other ministers, and primarily at this stage really about the public inquiry. You were in front of committee answering questions, but I want to talk to you about the public inquiry itself. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association, for instance, has said that the government's own terms of reference given to the commissioner really look at how this all came about, how the convoy ended up where it was, why it took so long to remove, as opposed to explaining why the government needed the Emergencies Act and how you met that legal threshold. What do you say to that you are spending more time on the context as opposed to the action the government took?
Well, first and foremost, transparency is incredibly important. There should be scrutiny of the Emergencies Act so that it is used only when it is absolutely necessary. And given the serious endangerment to the health and safety of Canadians, the serious threat to our territorial integrity in the form of the assaults at our borders, and the fact that at the time we'd gotten advice from law enforcement that the existing authorities were not effective at restoring public safety, we chose to invoke. And again, to the credit of the drafters of the Emergencies Act, there is built into it important review processes, including the public inquiry. Judge Rouleau has broad powers to compel witnesses, to compel information, to compel documents, including classified documents, to ensure that there is a robust review. Our intention is to collaborate and to work very closely with him. We've already done that. And we want to be sure that we're validated in this decision, but equally that there are hopefully some recommendations going forward, for example, around the cooperation between different branches of police, whether it's in Ottawa or elsewhere, so this never happens again.
Okay, I want to come back to the question because I'm not sure you answered it, but let me just ask you this first. Will the justice be able to look at cabinet documents? Will he be able to disclose whether anything he saw in those documents reassures him? Will he be able to make any of that public?
Well, as I said, we contemplate that he will have access to classified information. Judge Rouleau is an experienced jurist who has time on both trial courts as well as appellate courts, so he would be familiar with balancing the constitutional principles of cabinet confidentiality, which is an important hallmark of our democracy, with openness and the need for robust review. We are going to take those decisions as they come to him. He will ultimately be in a position to ensure that the public can be assured that we took the right decision last January and February, and as I say, hopefully make some recommendations.
Okay, back to the prior question, though. Again, when you laid out the terms of the inquiry, and I don't know if the justice can broaden them or not, but it does seem as though the focus is really on what led to this. The goals of the convoy, the participants, the funding, the misinformation, the economic impact. I was under the impression that the Emergencies Act review, the onus was on the government to prove why you needed to invoke it, not how protesters were behaving and why there is polarization in society. So why is the focus not on trying to understand how you met that legal threshold?
Well, I want to make it clear to your viewers, Rosie, that the two are completely reconcilable, which is to say that the genesis of the so-called Freedom Convoy, which, as you recall, started with a shocking declaration that the Governor General should remove from office the Prime Minister and the government if they didn't revoke all of the mandates. And there were organizers and leaders who said that this will only end with violence and with bullets, was in part the ideologically motivated extremist rhetoric that helped to incite thousands at the border checkpoints, and including in Ottawa, which was laid to siege. So examining those circumstances is part of the work, as well as the law enforcement response. And that is captured within the mandate and the scope of the inquiry. And I would just again reiterate that the judge will have the broad power and latitude to make sure that he's got a fulsome record and the information that he needs to engage in this review.
You told the committee this week that the police jurisdiction of the street in front of Parliament, which is Wellington Street for people that don't know it, that is perhaps becoming problematic, and that you're painfully aware that the jurisdictional issues are problematic. Do you think that now has to become part of the parliamentary precinct and has to be dealt with by the Parliamentary Protective Service?
It's certainly a question that has preoccupied my mind, and not only me. I think many within government are looking at the early stages of the illegal occupation and blockade in Ottawa. And I think what's really important is that the committee do its work, study this issue, that Judge Rouleau do his work and study this issue, so that there can be, again, some tangible proposals and recommendations on how different jurisdictions of law enforcement pull together and work together and are able to mobilize resources. And Wellington Street, as you know, Rosie, being a resident in Ottawa, and I live there for large parts of the year, is still under the jurisdiction of the Ottawa Police Service. When you have a national emergency like we did last January and February, I do think it bears some further study on how those different branches work together.
Let me just end on this. Is this now? We've now spent another weekend where I would imagine, hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent on policing again, if not more. Is this sort of the new normal now for protests in Canada, that the response has to, because of what happened, be really expansive, that parts of the city has to be controlled in order to prevent them from getting out of control? Is that the lesson we should take away from this?
Well, I think as a general observation, we have to be very eyes wide open about what challenges we have to our public safety and to national security. And look, there is no doubt that I think coming out of the pandemic, there is fatigue and frustration, and everybody wants to get back to normal. And I think with a spring and longer days and hopefully more trade and travel, as we're seeing, that Canadians are feeling confident that we're moving in the right direction. But at the same time, when you have individuals who move beyond what I think is a good, robust debate about public policy into the kind of mobilization that we saw last January and February, that we've got to be very sober about that. We've got to be ready. And I think that these two important review exercises, both in the form of the parliamentary committee, as well as the now full public inquiry that will be led by by Justice Rouleau, will ensure that we are, and that's certainly, as Minister of Public Safety, something that I'm looking forward to participating in.
Okay, Minister, thank you for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rosie.